There's a thing folks out here don't like to say out loud, so I'll say it for them. A person can be bought. Not their soul, maybe. Not the part that prays or the part that hates, but the hours of their day, the strength in their back, the years off the front of their life. Those can be sold like grain, and a signature on the wrong paper can hand them to a stranger before the coffee's gone cold. I watched it happen to a girl named Della Merrick on a Tuesday morning. I've never once managed to forget. I've kept a ledger my whole life, every horse I've shod, every favor I've done, every dollar owed to me, and every one I owed back. Numbers are honest. People aren't. And on that Tuesday I learned that some debts can't be written in any column because they aren't measured in money at all. What I'm about to tell you isn't a rescue story. I know that's what the title makes it sound like, poor girl, rich man from the mountain, happily ever after. But I was there, close enough to hear her breathing, and I'll tell you plain. Nobody got saved that easy. What she got handed wasn't a new life. It was a chance to build one. And Lord, did that girl make them pay to watch her try. Stay with me. This one sits in your chest a while. The paper was already on the barrel top when I looked up from my forge, and Della Merrick was staring at it like it might bite. I remember the sound before I remember the sight, the little dry rattle of it, one corner lifting in the wind and slapping back down, over and over, while nobody moved to weight it. Ezra Pike stood behind that barrel in his good vest with his thumbs hooked in the pockets, patient as a spider. And the girl stood in front of it in a dress the color of dishwater, hands folded so tight in front of her that the knuckles had gone white as bone. I'd shot a horse not 20 minutes before. My hands were still black to the wrist. I set the rasp down real slow, the way you do when you don't want a spooked animal to bolt, except there wasn't any animal, just people, and people don't spook and run. That's the trouble with them. They stand right there and let it happen. Sign it, Della. Pike didn't raise his voice. He never did, that was the worst of him. Your father signed his part last night. This here's just the acknowledgement. You read it. You know it's fair. Fair? I've heard men use that word the way a butcher uses a clean apron, to make the blood look tidy. She didn't sign. Not yet. Her chin came up a half-inch, and across 40 feet of dust and mourning I saw her jaw working like she was chewing on something she couldn't swallow. Behind her, half the town had found reasons to be on that stretch of road at once. The hollow's like that. Thornfield Crossing, they call it proper, but everybody just says the hollow, on account of the whole town sits down in the cup of the valley with Brandywine Ridge shouldering up black and enormous to the north. We live in the mountain's shadow, always have. You learn not to look up at it too long or it starts to feel like it's leaning over you. I'm getting ahead, let me put it plain. Della's father was Silas Merrick, and Silas Merrick was a drinking man and a gambling one, which is two ways of setting fire to the same house. When his wife was alive, she kept the flames low. Ada Merrick, I shot her mare for 11 years and never once got paid in coin, always in bread and mending and that low, warm laugh of hers, and I counted myself square on the deal. When the fever took her the winter before this, it took the last honest break off Silas's wheels. He rolled downhill all spring. By that Tuesday, he'd rolled clean through everything the family owned and out the other side. And the only thing left with any value in it was the girl. You want to know what a person's worth in a place like the Hollow? I can tell you exact, because it was written on that paper flapping in the wind. Silas Merrick owed Ezra Pike $340 store credit gambling markers Pike had bought up cheap, and a loan against the house that was already Pike's in everything but the deed. $340. And in place of it, Silas had signed his daughter over into bond labor. 7 years. 7 years of her hands in Pike's store and Pike's kitchen and wherever else Pike found use for them. And at the end of it, if she lived and behaved, the debt would be called clean. 7 years. She was 22. Do that arithmetic and tell me it's fair. I keep a ledger. I've mentioned that. Little black book, greasy at the corners, tucked in my apron. Every debt in the Hollow that ran through my forge, I wrote it down. Who owed me for a wheel rim, who I owed for a sack of oats, The whole quiet economy of a small place where nobody has cash and everybody has need. I'm no scholar, but I can read a column of figures and tell you when they don't add up. And standing there that morning, I did the only sum that mattered. $340 divided by 7 years came out to a woman's whole youth for less than $1 a day. I have never in my life wanted so badly to burn a page. Della, Pike again, softer now, which meant harder. The longer you make this take, the more folks watch. You want them watching. That reached her. Her shoulders came down a notch. She unclenched one hand, and I watched her reach for the pen he'd laid across the paper, and I heard myself make a sound, not a word, just a breath. The sound a man makes when he's about to do something stupid and hasn't decided yet what. And that was when the mountain came down to town. You didn't hear a rider so much as feel one. The road into the hollow from the north is all switchback and shale, and when a horse comes down it careful you get this long uneven clatter that arrives before the animal does. Every head on that street turned north, because there was only one place a rider came from on the north road, and only one man who lived up there worth turning your head for. Jonah Brand owned the ridge, owned the timber on it and the silver seam under it and the grazed land and the high meadows, owned near everything a man could put a fence around in that country, and he came down off it maybe 4 times a year. Some folks said he'd killed a man out east and bought his peace with the money. Some said he'd been burned in a mine fire and couldn't stand to be looked at. Kids said he was 9 feet tall and ate the ones who trespassed. All I knew for certain was he paid cash, always, and paid on time. And I'd reshod his big gray gelding twice, and both times the man had said maybe 6 words, and left a coin on my anvil worth 3 times the work. He rode into the middle of it on that same gray. Tall, yes, but not 9 feet, just tall the way a fence post is tall, all straight lines and no give. Duster the color of wet ash. Hat pulled low. And when he swung down off the horse he did it stiff on the left side, favoring that leg, so the mine fire story might have had something in it after all. He didn't look at the crowd. He didn't look at Pike. He looked at the paper on the barrel. And then, for one long second that I felt go right through the whole street, he looked at the girl. Della looked back. That surprised me. Half the grown men in the hollow couldn't hold Jonah Brand's eye for the space of a howdy. And this girl who'd been about to sell 7 years of her life looked up into that shadowed face and did not flinch, and something in the set of her mouth said she was too far past afraid to start now. That the Merrick debt. Brand's voice was low and rusted, a voice that didn't get used much. Pike straightened up. You could see him doing sums of his own. This was the richest man in the valley taking an interest, and Pike hadn't lived as long as he had by missing the shape of an opportunity. Merrick's paper, Mr. Brand, all legal. Girl's bond against her father's account. How much? Now it ain't strictly a matter of. How much, Pike? The spider went still. 340. Brand reached inside the ash-colored duster. And I swear to you the whole street held its breath, because we all knew what was coming and none of us could believe it was coming. And the girl went pale, then flushed, then pale again, like her body couldn't decide whether this was rescue or just a change of owners. Which, if you're keeping track, is exactly the right question, and I'll thank you to remember she was the only one on that street clear-headed enough to ask it. He counted the money out onto the barrel top. Gold and silver both, a small bright pile of it, more coin than most of us saw in a year, and he weighted the flapping paper down under it so it finally stopped its rattling. Bond's mine now, Brand said. Give me the paper. Pike's hand hovered. The terms of the bond transfer too. I'm not buying a bond. Brand's rusted voice didn't rise, but it took on an edge like a blade drawn slow. I'm buying the debt. Debt's paid, the bond's got nothing to stand on. You want to argue the law of it, we can ride to the county seat and argue it in front of the judge, and I'll pay his time too. A pause. Or you can take your money and be a rich man by suppertime. You're choosing. I have watched a lot of men make a lot of choices over a barrel top. I never saw one made faster. Pike swept that coin into his apron so quick you'd have thought it might evaporate, and he handed over the paper, and just like that, in the space of a minute and a half, Della Merrick's 7 years came unwritten. But here's the thing I need you to understand, because the town got it wrong and told it wrong for years after. Nobody freed her. A stranger she'd never spoken to had just bought her father's debt and torn up the terms. And now she stood in the middle of the road belonging to no one, which sounds like freedom until you're a 22-year-old woman with no money, no home, a drunk father, and a whole town watching to see what the mountain man meant to do with the girl he just spent $340 on. Because that's the sum everybody was doing now. That's the ugly arithmetic. Men don't lay out a year's wages for a stranger and want nothing. That's not how the hollow works. That's not how anywhere works. Della knew it too. She looked at the torn paper in Brand's hand, and she said the first words I'd heard her say all morning, and her voice came out steady, but I heard the tremor underneath it like water under ice. What do you want for it? Not thank you, not who are you, what do you want for it, smart girl, God, but she was a smart girl. Brand looked at her a long moment. Then he did something I didn't expect, and I don't think she did either. He held the paper out, not to keep, to give. And when she didn't take it, he set it in her folded hands and closed her fingers over it, careful, the way you'd hand someone a bird you didn't want to crush. It's yours, he said. Burn it, keep it, wallpaper your privy with it, I don't care. He turned to gather the gray's reins. Nothing's owed, not to Pike, not to me. And he'd have ridden off right then, I truly believe. Ridden back up the mountain and left her standing in the road holding a paper that meant nothing and a life that meant less. If Della Merrick hadn't done the bravest fool thing I ever watched a person do. She followed him. Then where am I supposed to go? It stopped him with one foot in the stirrup. The whole street heard it. She wasn't asking to be rude. She was asking because it was the true question and nobody else was going to say it. Her father had drunk the house out from under her. Pike would take her back into bond in a heartbeat now that Brand's back was turned. She had, that morning, exactly one dress and one pair of shoes and one paper that used to be a cage and was now just paper. And the man who'd unlocked the cage was about to leave her standing in it with the door open and nowhere on the other side. Brand looked at her over the gray's back. Something moved in that shadowed face. I was close enough now to see it, having drifted up the street the way you do, something that wasn't pity exactly. Pity's easy. This was harder than pity. This was a man looking at a problem he'd caused by trying to solve a different one. You got no people. I've got a father who sold me for whiskey money, flat. No self-pity in it, which is why it landed so hard. So no, I've got no people. The wind came down off the ridge and worried at the hem of her dishwater dress. Somewhere a dog barked and gave it up, and I stood there with my black hands hanging useless at my sides thinking, this is the moment. This is the crossroads. Whatever this man says next writes the rest of that girl's life. I run cattle up on the high meadow, Brand said finally, and a house too big for one man and a housekeeper too old to climb the stairs anymore. It's honest work. Room, board, and wages, real wages, coin, yours to keep and yours to leave with any day you want to leave. He paused, and the next part cost him something to say. I could see it. You'd have a lock on your own door. I'd carry the only other key, and I give you my word it'd stay on the ring. But I know what my word's worth to a woman who just got sold. So, he nodded at the road. You can walk up with me and see it, or you can walk anywhere else in this valley. It's the first choice that's been yours in a while, near as I can tell. Take your time on it. Now I want to tell you she trusted him. I want to tell you she saw the good in him right off and her heart eased, and she climbed up behind him with a light in her eye. That's how they tell it now, the young ones. It's a lie. What she did was she stood in that road for a long, long minute, and I watched her weigh it, a stranger's word against a certainty, a mountain she'd never climbed against a town that had just watched her get bought and sold and hadn't lifted a hand. I watched her look back at Pike's store, at the porch where she'd have spent 7 years. I watched her look at me, even the black-handed old Smith she'd known her whole life, and I couldn't give her anything but a small nod that meant I don't know, girl, but I've never known him to lie, and God forgive me if that nod sent her wrong. And I watched her look at the paper in her hand, her father's debt, her canceled cage, and then she walked to the edge of the road and she crouched down and she tucked that paper up under a rock. Didn't burn it, didn't keep it, just set it down and left it, like a thing she was done carrying. Then she straightened up and she looked at Jonah Brand and she said, "I'll walk up, but I keep the wages from the first day. And if I don't like the lock on that door, I come straight back down and you don't follow." "Done," Brand said. She didn't ride behind him. She walked, the whole long switchback climb, on her own 2 feet beside the gray with her chin up and her dishwater skirts gray with dust. And Jonah Brand led the horse and matched her pace and didn't say one word the whole way. And the last I saw of them that Tuesday they were 2 small figures going up into the shadow of the ridge, the mountain swallowing them switchback by switchback until the road took them out of sight. I went back to my forge. I picked up my rasp, and for the first time in 30 years of keeping that greasy little ledger, I opened it up and I couldn't think of a single honest way to write down what I'd just seen. There was no column for it. A debt paid that created a bigger one nobody could name. A freedom given that felt like a hook not yet set. A girl going up a mountain toward either the best thing that ever happened to her or the last mistake she'd ever get to make. And no way under heaven for me to know which. I wrote one line. I've still got the book. It says Merrick D. Act, settled, balance unknown. Balance unknown. That was the truest thing I ever wrote in it. For 3 weeks I heard nothing, which in the hollow means everybody heard everything and none of it was true. She was his wife by Friday, one story went. She was his prisoner when another chained in the cellar, or free as a bird, or already run off, or already dead. The town has a great appetite and a poor memory, and it fed on Della Merrick for the better part of a month, and I got sick of all of it and said so, loud. Over a bent plowshare I was straightening for the Aldous boy, and after that folks brought their gossip to somebody else's fire. Silas Merrick came around my forge in the second week. Sober, which was its own kind of terrible, because a sober Silas had to sit with what a drunk Silas had done. He stood in my doorway a while, turning his hat in his hands. "You saw it," he said. "I saw it. They say she went up willing. She went up because you left her no place else to stand." I didn't look up from the plowshare. Some things you can only say to the iron. "You had a daughter Tuesday morning, Silas. You want to know where she is, there's a mountain. Climb it and ask her yourself. Don't come asking me to make it sit easier on you because it won't and it shouldn't." He didn't climb it. I didn't think he would. He drank himself back down into the ground he'd dug, and I stopped seeing him for a while, and I'd be lying if I said I spared him much thought. It was the girl I thought about. It was the girl I kept turning over in my mind like a coin I couldn't read the face of, wondering was she all right up there, wondering had I knotted her into something I'd answer for. Then in the third week, a boy rode down off the ridge on Jonah Brand's gray with a list of hardware to fill, hinges and a new axe head, and a set of nails for a horse Brand wanted shod. Would I come up and do it? And at the bottom of the list, in a different hand, small and careful and pressing hard enough to near tear the paper, was written, "Mr. Vane, bring your ledger. There's a wage I want you to write down proper. DM." I read it 3 times. Then I packed my kit and I saddled my old mule and I went up the mountain to see for myself. The high meadow sat above the tree line where the air went thin and clean, and Jonah Brand's house sat in the middle of it, a great gray timber thing, too big by half, exactly like he'd said, with a wide porch and glass in the windows and a barn behind it bigger than most homes in the hollow. Cattle grazed the far slope in a brown scatter. Smoke came up thin and straight from the chimney. It was, I'll admit it, about the most peaceful sight I'd laid eyes on in years, and it made me nervous as a cat, because peace like that up a mountain owned by a man like that had to be paid for somehow, and I still didn't know the price. Della came out onto the porch when my mule's hooves hit the yard. 3 weeks had changed her. Not soft, she hadn't gone soft, and she never did, not in all the years I knew her after. But the tightness was gone out of her, that white-knuckled clench I'd watched her hold in front of Pike's barrel. She stood easy. She had her sleeves rolled and flowered to the elbow and her hair tied back off a face that had caught some sun. And when she saw it was me, a thing happened to her mouth that I realized with a small shock was a smile. I hadn't known she had won. I don't think she'd had much use for it in a while. "You came," she said. "You wrote bring the ledger. A man doesn't ignore an order like that." That got a short laugh out of her, and she came down the steps, and she did a thing then I'll carry to my grave. She took my old black hand in both her flower-white ones and held it a second, just held it, and said, "You nodded at me. In the road. I saw you. I want you to know I've thought about that nod every day, and I've decided you nodded me right." I had to look at the barn for a minute. Dust in my eye, that's all it was. Inside, over coffee at a long table meant for a family that had never come, she told me how it stood. And it stood exactly like Jonah Brand had said it would in the road, which shocked me more than any cruelty could have. Because, in my experience, a man's promise and a man's practice are two animals that rarely graze the same field. She had the lock on her door. She had the only key on her ring. He'd handed it to her the first night and never asked after it. She worked hard, real work, the housekeeping and the cooking and more the books, because it turned out Della Merrick had a head for figures that had been rotting unused her whole life, and Brand had a fortune he hated the paperwork of. She was, 3 weeks in, half running the business end of the whole ridge. And she was paid. Coin every week, into a tin she kept in her room. And Brand had told her flat that the day the tin held enough to start her own life anywhere she pleased, he'd hitch the wagon and drive her to it himself and wish her well. "So," she said, and she set a small stack of coins on the table between us, "here, the first 3 weeks' wages, and I want it written down proper in your ledger, Mr. Vane, in a real book in ink, because I have been a debt my whole life. I have been the number my father owed and the bond Pike bought and the sum that man out there laid on a barrel. Every ledger I've ever been in, I was the thing owed." She tapped the coins. "I want to be in one just once as the one who earned. Write it down. Della Merrick earned in her own name. I don't care if it's your book of horseshoes. I want it to exist somewhere." And so I opened my greasy little ledger at that long, empty table in that too big house, and under the line that said Merrick D. Act. Settled. Balance unknown, I wrote a new one, and I wrote it careful, pressing hard enough to near tear the paper same as she had. Merrick D. earned WK. 1-3 in full in her own name, paid to no one, kept. She read it upside down across the table. She read it twice. And then that smart, hard, unbroken girl who hadn't cried in the road when they sold her, who hadn't cried when her own father signed her away, who I'd have bet my forge had forgotten how. She put her flower-white hand over her mouth and she cried, quiet, into the coffee steam, over a line in a blacksmith's ledger. I let her. Some debts you can only pay by looking away while a person collects. I rode down the mountain that evening easier in my heart than I'd been in a month. I'd seen it with my own eyes. The girl was safe. The man was true. The lock held and the wages were real, and the story was going to end the way the young ones tell it, the way titles like this one promise, poor girl, rich man, a new life given and gladly taken. I should have known better. I've kept a ledger 30 years, and the one thing a ledger teaches you is that every account has two sides, and I'd only been shown the one. There was a whole other column up on that mountain I hadn't seen yet. Why a man that rich lived that alone? What put the stiffness in his leg and the rust in his voice, and the lock he thought about as much as she did? There was a debt of Jonah Brand's own, older and heavier than $340, and it was coming due whether any of us were ready or not. And down in the valley, sober and shamed and dangerous the way only a weak man with something to prove can be, Silas Merrick had started at last to climb. I didn't know any of that yet. I rode down into the shadow of the ridge thinking it was a rescue story. I found out the hard way it was only ever half of one. The trouble came up the mountain on a wagon, and I was on it, so I'll tell it the way I lived it. It was high summer when Jonah Brand's boy rode down again, and this time the note wasn't in Della's careful hand. It was in Brand's own 6 words, exactly like his talking. Come up. Bring the ledger. JB, no please, no why. But under the plain of it there was something that made me saddle the mule before I'd finished reading, because Jonah Brand had never once in his life sent for anything he could do without, and a man like that asking for you means the ground has already started to move. I passed Silas Merrick on the north road, half a mile up. He was walking. Sober, I could tell from 20 feet, the way a sober Silas held his shoulders like they hurt him. He had a bundle over one shoulder and a look on his face I hadn't seen there in years, and it took me a mile of riding past to place it. Purpose. Silas Merrick had found himself a purpose, and in my experience there is nothing on God's earth more dangerous than a weak man who has decided, too late, to become a strong one. Where you headed, Silas? I said, though I knew. To see my daughter. He didn't slow. A man's got a right. A man's got what he's earned, same as anybody. I turned the mule to keep pace with him a moment. She's built something up there, Silas, with her own 2 hands out of nothing you left her. You go up there to take a piece of it, I'm not going up to take. Something flared in him, and for a second I saw the man Ada Merrick must have married before the bottle ate him. I'm going up to say I'm sorry, that's all. Then I'll come down and never trouble her again. You think I don't know what I did? His voice cracked clean in half. I know exactly what I did, Cormac. I've known every single day. That's the whole trouble with being sober. You can't stop knowing. And Lord help me, I believed him. That was the worst of it. I rode on up the mountain half a length ahead of him, believing the man meant well, and being right about that didn't make what came after hurt any less. Sometimes the meaning well ones do the deepest damage. They walk right past your guard because you've got no cause to raise it. The house was in an uproar when I got there, quiet style, the kind of uproar careful people have, where nothing's thrown and nobody's shouting but the air's gone tight as a drumhead. Della met me at the barn, and the ease I'd seen on her 3 weeks back was gone, scrubbed clean off. The clench was back in her jaw, but it wasn't fear this time. I'd learned her face by then. This was fury, banked down low and burning hot. It's Jonah, she said before I was off the mule. There's men come from back east, 2 days ago. They're at the county seat and they've sent word up, and she stopped, made herself breathe. You'd best hear it from him. He asked for you special. I don't know why. I found out why quick enough. Jonah Brand was in the front room, standing at the big window that looked down the whole switchback road to the hollow, and he didn't turn around when I came in. That leg of his was bothering him. He had his weight all on the good one. On the table behind him were papers, a lot of papers, and a ledger of his own, a fat leather one, lying open, and even from the doorway I could see the columns didn't balance. I've a nose for that. Numbers that don't sit right have a look to them, like a horse that's about to bolt. You keep an honest book, Brand said to the window, not a question. 30 years. And folks trust it. If your ledger says a debt's paid, that's the end of it. County judge take your book over most men's word. He might. I came into the room slow. What's this about, Mr. Brand? He turned around then, and for the first time I saw Jonah Brand look old. Not the stiffness, I knew that. This was in the eyes. 12 years ago, he said, I had a partner, silver claim, back in Colorado, man named Harlan Vane. He caught my flinch. No relation to you, common enough name. Harlan and me struck it good, and we struck it early, and when there was money to split, Harlan decided a partner was a thing he'd rather not have. There was a fire. He touched his leg, absent, like a man touching an old headstone. In the shaft. I was meant to be in it. I got out, most of me got out, and by the time I could stand again, Harlan had run off east with the papers redrawn to say the whole claim was his, and me a dead man who couldn't argue it. But you didn't die. I didn't die. Took me 2 years, and most of what I could carry to prove the claim was half mine, and by then I'd have signed it all away just to be done with courts and lawyers and men. So I sold him my half, cheap, cash in hand and a signed release, All debts clear between us in writing witnessed. I made sure of the witness part. I'd learned that much. He nodded at the papers on the table. I took that cash and I came here and I bought a mountain and I told myself the account was closed. 12 years vain. I built a whole life on the belief that account was closed. I was starting to see the shape of it, and I didn't like the shape. Harlan Vane died last winter, Brand said, and his sons found his papers, and his papers don't mention any release. His papers say Jonah Brand still owes the estate $40,000 against that claim, plus 12 years interest, which comes to a figure that take this ridge and everything on it and still leave me owing. He said it flat, the way Della had said I've got a father who sold me for whiskey money, all the feeling pressed down under the fact. They've come to collect. And the one paper in this world that proves I don't owe it, the signed release, the witnessed one, burned in my own barn 3 years back, along with a lot of other things I thought I'd never need again. The room was very quiet. So it's my book against their book, I said slowly. Except my book's got nothing in it about you in Colorado. No, it doesn't. And here Brand looked at me with something I can only call shame, which on that granite face was a terrible thing to witness. But there's a witness still living. The man who watched Harlan and me sign that release 12 years ago in a lawyer's office in Denver. A young clerk he was then. I tracked him 2 years back, meaning to, I don't know, meaning to have him near, I suppose, in case. His name's in my book. He tapped the fat leather ledger. And 3 days ago, when the sons rode into the county seat, I sent for him, offered to pay his way and his time to come testify what he saw signed. A long pause. He wrote back yesterday. He'll come, but he wants $2,000 for it. Says his memory's a valuable thing and it clears up considerable for $2,000. I understood then why he'd sent for me, and it turned my stomach. You want to know, is it worth it? I said, paying a man to remember the truth. I want to know if a debt bought that way is clean. Brand's rusted voice dropped low. I've spent my whole life since that fire trying to owe no man anything and be owed nothing back. Clean books, it's the only thing I ever managed to make come out right. And now the only way to save it is to buy a man's honesty like it's a sack of feed, and I can't. He stopped. His jaw worked. I keep thinking on that girl, Della, what she said the day I paid Pike. What do you want for it? Because she knew nothing's free. And she was right. She was righter than anybody in that road, and now here I am about to prove it, that even the truth's got a price, that a man'll sell you your own innocence back if you're desperate enough to buy it. He shook his head slow. I don't want to teach her that. Of everything I stand to lose, that's the piece I can't stand. That she'd learn from watching me that the world's exactly as ugly as she always feared. And that, I want you to sit with this, because it's the whole heart of the thing. That was the moment I understood Jonah Brand had not saved Della Merrick at all. She'd saved him. Some long-broken, walled-off, mind-fire-scarred part of him had been dying up on that mountain in a house too big for one man, and a girl with flour on her hands and no quit in her spine had walked in, and without meaning to, shown him there was still something in the world worth being honest for. He wasn't protecting his money. He was protecting her belief that a man could be good. It was the only fortune he had left that he cared about. That was when Della came in from the hall. She'd been listening. Of course she'd been listening. I'd have bet the forge she had the whole thing sums end all in her head before I'd even reached the yard. And she came into that room with the ledgers and the papers and the ruined account, and she looked at Jonah Brand, and she said the thing that saved us all, and it was the coldest, clearest, most beautiful piece of arithmetic I ever heard a person do. Don't pay the clerk, Della said. Brand turned. Then I lose the... You don't pay him $2,000 to remember, because a memory you bought can be bought again by the other side, and their pockets are deeper than yours by the time you're done. She crossed to the table and put her flour-dusted finger on his fat leather ledger on the columns that wouldn't balance. But you've got the clerk's name, and you've got his letter in his own hand asking you for money to say what he saw. That's not a bribe you refuse, Jonah. That's evidence. A witness who will sell his testimony to the highest bidder isn't a witness the judge will believe from anybody. You take that letter to the county seat and you show it to the judge and you say, This is the man the estate will put on the stand, and here he is in writing selling his account to whoever pays most. You don't buy the truth." Her voice had gone quiet and hard and certain. "You expose the price the other side would have paid for the lie, and then it's their book that won't balance, not yours." The room held still. "You'd break him," Brand said slowly. "Ruin the clerk. He'd never testify to anything again anywhere. That letter'd finish him. He put the price on his own honesty, Jonah, not me. And there it was, the morally heavy thing, the choice that cost her because I watched it cost her. She wasn't wrong. She was right the way a blade is right. But she was also, in that moment, choosing to do to another desperate man something close to what Pike had tried to do to her, take the one thing he had of value and use it to unmake him. She knew it. I saw her know it. Her jaw was tight enough to crack a walnut. I spent my whole life being the number somebody else could use. I learned the ledger from the wrong side of it. And I am telling you, the only way you walk out of that courthouse still owning this mountain is you stop trying to keep your hands clean and you let me do the sum that saves you. Because I am very, very good at this sum." Her voice cracked just once, right at the end. "Let me be good at something that saves somebody for once, instead of the thing that gets somebody sold." Jonah Brand looked at her a long time. Then he did the thing that told me, finally, the whole truth of what had grown up on that mountain while the town below was busy telling lies about it. He didn't argue. He didn't shield her from it, didn't pat her hand and say no, no, I'll find another way, didn't do the thing weak men do that they call protecting a woman when it's really just refusing to see her clear. He looked at Della Merrick and he said, "All right. Then you'll come to the county seat and you'll do the sum yourself in front of the judge because it's your sum and I'll not stand up and take the credit for your work. You've had enough taken." He picked up his hat. "Partners split what they make, Miss Merrick. That was always the deal. I should have offered a soul with a head like yours. So, half the ridge if we win it. Signed, witnessed. I've learned that much." She stared at him. For once, the smart girl had nothing ready to say. "Now don't cry over it," Brand said gruffly, turning for the door so she wouldn't have to be watched doing it. "We haven't won yet, and there's a wagon to hitch. We won it. I won't drag you through the courthouse, the small hot room. The estate's slick lawyers, the two sons who looked so much like their thieving father that the sight of them settled something cold in my chest. Della did the sum. She laid the clerk's own letter on the judge's table, and she walked him through it in that quiet, hard voice, every figure clean. And when the estate's lawyer tried to talk over her, she let him finish, and then took his own words and folded them back into her arithmetic until his whole case sat there for everyone to see with its books unbalanced and its witness bought. She never raised her voice once. She didn't have to. Numbers are honest, even when people aren't. And Della Merrick had finally found the one place in all the world where being the coldest, clearest reader of a ledger in the valley was exactly the thing that set a person free. The judge threw the estate's claim out before supper, costs to the plaintiffs. The sons rode back east owning nothing of the ridge, and I hope to this day they had a long, unpleasant think on the way. But I told you at the start this wasn't a story where everybody got saved easy. And I meant it. So here's the part the young ones leave out when they tell it. Silas Merrick was in that courtroom. He'd climbed the mountain after all. That day I passed him on the road. And Della, I don't fully know what passed between them up at the house before we all rode down. And I never asked, because some ledgers aren't mine to read. But he was there in the back of the courtroom, sober, his hat in his hands, watching his daughter save a man's whole life with the head for figures he'd never once noticed she had. And when it was done, when the judge banged his gavel and it was over and Della stood there, having won it all, she turned around and she looked at her father in the back of that room. I was close, I heard it. "You watched," she said. "I watched," Silas said. His voice was wrecked. "Ada always said you had your grandmother's head for sums. I never," he stopped, started over. "I came up the mountain to say I'm sorry. That's all I came to do. I'm not asking you for anything. I just needed you to hear me say it out loud one time sober so you'd know I knew. I'm sorry, Della. I sold you. There's no bottom to how sorry I am." And here is where the story doesn't do what you want it to. Here is where I have to be honest with you the way my ledger's always honest, because a lie would be easier, and she deserved better than easy. Della Merrick did not forgive him. She didn't spit on him either. She didn't rage. She just looked at her father a long, long moment, this man who'd sold her over a barrel top and now stood wrecked and sober and sorry in the back of the room where she'd made herself into something he'd never be, and she said, quiet, "I believe you're sorry, I do," a breath. "But sorry's a word, Pa, it's not a payment, and I've spent my whole life having men hand me words where a debt was owed and call a square." Her chin came up that same half-inch I'd watched it come up in front of Pike's barrel a lifetime ago. "I can't square this with you today. Maybe not ever. I don't know yet. That's an honest answer, and it's the only one I've got." She held his eye. "But you climbed the mountain sober to say it. I'll write that down. It counts for something. It just doesn't count for everything, and I won't pretend it does to make you feel better. I'm done paying other people's debts with my own peace." Silas nodded. Tears ran down into his beard and he let them. "That's fair," he said. "That's more than fair." "No," Della said. "It's just true. Fair's got nothing to do with it." And she turned and walked out into the light, and her father let her go, which was, I think, the first genuinely decent thing I ever watched Silas Merrick do. To want something and not take it. To be owed nothing and ask for nothing and simply stand there and bear the true weight of what he'd done without trying to set it down on her again. I don't know if she ever forgave him. I truly don't. Years went by and she'd go down and see him sometimes. Sober years he managed to string together at the end, and sometimes they'd sit on his porch not saying much, and maybe that was forgiveness and maybe it was just two people who'd stopped keeping the ledger open between them. Some accounts you can't settle. You just, eventually, stop adding to them. They married the next spring. I'll not pretend they didn't, that'd be a lie in the other direction, and I've promised you the truth both ways. But it wasn't the marriage the title sold you, the rich man lifting the poor girl up into his life. By the time they stood up together in front of the whole hollow, Della Merrick owned half that ridge outright, signed and witnessed, earned with a courthouse sum that half the county still told stories about. She married Jonah Brand as a partner, an equal, a woman with her own coin in her own tin and her own name on her own deed, and the plain hard-won knowledge that she could walk down that mountain any day she chose and build a whole life somewhere else on nothing but the head on her shoulders. She didn't marry him because he saved her. She married him because, once she was free enough to choose anything at all, she looked over the whole wide world and chose him. That's a different thing. That's the only thing that was ever worth choosing. I stood up as a witness, me and my greasy ledger both. And after, when it was done and the fiddles were going and the whole hollow was up on that mountain eating and dancing in the long summer light, Della found me by the barn where I'd gone to get out from under all the joy for a minute, the way old men do. She had the ledger. I'd left it on the table. She held it out to me, open to the page, and I looked down and saw she'd added a line under mine in her own careful hand, pressing hard the way she always did. Merrick D. all debts settled, owed to no one, balance her own. You wrote balance unknown once, she said. The day I went up the mountain, I saw it when I asked you to write down my wages. I've thought about it a long time. She closed the book and put it back in my black hands. I wanted you to have the last line, since you kept the first one honest all this while, even when you didn't know how it'd come out. I've kept a ledger 31 years now. Every debt in the hollow that ran through my forge, I wrote it down, and I could tell you to the dollar what any man owes any other in this whole valley. But I want to tell you plain, the way I'd want it told to me. There is no column in any book I ever kept for what that girl grew into on that mountain. No figure for it. It doesn't divide into days or dollars or years. The town tells it as a rescue. Rich man, poor girl, a new life given. I was there. I'll tell you what it really was. It was a girl who got handed one single choice in a road full of people who'd have chosen for her, and who took that one small choice and turned it, some by some and season by season, into a whole life nobody could ever buy or sell again. Nobody gave her that. She earned every figure of it herself. And I've got it written down, in ink in her own name in a book of horseshoes.